Today, I'm going to share one simple trick that most beginner creators ignore. And it's probably why your videos aren't looking as professional as you want them to. You know that feeling. You wrote your script, filmed all day, got tons of B-roll, tried different angles, and then you sit down to edit and something just feels a little off. I've spent my whole life obsessed with art and for the last 5 years as a full-time designer. And what I've learned is that looking professional isn't random. There's always a reason. This one trick changed how my videos felt overnight, and once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. So what is the secret? It's sound effects. You know, all the dings, the whooshes, and trending meme sounds like or bruh. And I'm not saying you need to add a random whoosh every time something moves on screen. Sound effects in video editing are any audio cue that's not music that you intentionally layer into your edit to support what's happening visually, like a subtle bell when text appears on screen, a soft pop when you cut to a new topic, a light whoosh on a transition, or even ambient room tone that fills a silence. It's the audio layer that most beginner creators completely skip, and it's exactly why their videos feel flat. Now, here's what this means for you as a creator. Adding sound effects is one of the fastest, cheapest ways to close the gap between this looks homemade and this feels like a real production. You don't need new gear. You don't need to reshoot anything. All you need to do is add it in post-production. When I first started utilizing sound effects intentionally in my videos, I started getting comments from people saying how well my videos were made. My shots and editing technique didn't evolve overnight, and the only thing that changed was the added sound effects, and people immediately started to respond. I'm not a scientist, but I love science. And there's a scientific reason why the sound effects are so effective. It's because of the way our brain processes information. There's a study I found, I'll link it down below for anyone curious, but essentially they gathered 120 healthy individuals between the age of 18 and 20 and tested the reaction time to auditory and visual stimuli and found that the participants reacted to the auditory stimulus faster than visual stimulus. That tells me one thing I need to know. When you layer in the sound effects in your video, your viewers' brains are processing that information faster than they realize. So before they see anything on screen, we're providing auditory context that helps enrich their viewing experience. It signals to them, look, this is what's happening in this video, or hey, pay attention to this part, it's important. All with a simple, well-placed sound effect. So now that we understand how important sound effects are, how exactly do we use them? There are a lot of different usage for sound effects in filmmaking, but I found that for casual vlogs and talking head YouTube videos, it's actually a lot simpler. There's probably 3 main scenarios you would need to consider for your content: transition scenes, title and text, and descriptive sounds. Now, I want to talk through what my editing process looks like with sound design and walk through each of these scenarios and how I treat these sounds. Sound design is usually the very last step in my editing process. I personally like to add in the sound effects first, then background music as the final touch. But there are creators who start with the music to drive the mood and the story, so pick a method that works best for you. Once I'm happy with the pacing and the story of my video, I skim through my entire video and identify key areas where it would be appropriate for me to add sound effects. By this point, I have a general idea of where and what because it's something I think about throughout the editing process. I write down notes up to this point for ideas, so I would also refer back to the notes and make decision that way. Let's use one of my old videos as an example. In this video, I have 3 big chapters with large title at the beginning of each chapter. Whenever a large text appears on the screen, it's a good candidate for sound effects. It breaks a pattern and signals to the viewer, hey, something's changing and you want to pay attention to this. A little side note about how I document these notes. I use 2 different ways. First, there is a way for you to mark certain points in the video within your editing software. I use DaVinci Resolve, and when you use the shortcut M, it creates this little mark, which you can go back to later when you're adding sound effects. Another method is directly within the script. I don't always script my videos, so this only applies when I do write one, obviously. But in Notion, I use different text color to indicate where and what type of sound effects to use. And this method's nice because you can also mark where you're layering B-rolls, if you're using a transition animation, and more. But we can cover that in another video about how I plan an entire video from start to finish. Anyways, back to sound effects. Now that we've identified where we're using sound effects, it's time to pick out the exact sounds. General rule of thumb is to use the same sound for the same action. For example, for the 3 chapter breaks with large text in my video example, all 3 chapter titles would have the same sound effects. First, we have gears. I decided to upgrade my microphone. I want to talk about storytelling. It gives your video a nice structure, easier for your viewer to associate the sound with chapter breaks. And most importantly, it makes your life easier. Most of us small creators don't yet have a full-on team dedicated to video production, so you want to templatize and save time whenever you can. For the chapter breaks, I had a few different candidates like this light bell sound, click sound, and a swipe sound. I decided to go with the bell sound as I felt like I could find a better use for the other 2 sounds. Now that you know where and what to use for sound effects, it's time to create a dedicated sound effect track within your editing software. This might not make too much sense if you're using a simpler editing apps on your phone, but if you're on DaVinci Resolve, Premiere Pro, or Final Cut Pro, you can separate out different tracks for different things. The key here is to not mix in your sound effects with your background music, so you can adjust the audio level globally instead of having to individually adjust the volume for each sound file. When I add sound effects, I like to make sure that the sound effect either lines up perfectly with the start of a word or slightly before. Now, what do I mean by that? Going back to this video example, whenever there's a chapter break, I talk about the new chapter in the main talking head video. If I layer the sound effect after I say the title, it doesn't feel cohesive, and it can distract the viewer's attention instead of enhance it. A bonus point here is that when you do that, you also want to make sure that the tracks also line up with the text layer. So the audio cue from the main talking head video, the actual title appearing on the screen, and the sound effect will all happen on the same beat. Here's an example of this chapter break without the tracks lined up. First, we have gears. Over the last year. Now compare that to this improved version where the 3 tracks line up perfectly. First, we have gears. I want to talk about storytelling. See the difference? Or should I say, did you hear the difference? Now that covers the first use case I mentioned earlier, but what about the other 2 use cases? I won't go too in-depth with these 2, but I still want to show you an example for each. I didn't really have a need for a transition sound in this particular video, so I filmed a quick fake transition scenario to show you how you can incorporate sound when you go from one scene to the next, like this next example.
Show your ice cream. Currently, we're just sitting in the car with the AC blasting so they can stay cool. Yeah, it's like a random Tuesday afternoon. There's a lot of golfers. This is like a perfect weather to golf in Arizona. I don't golf myself. I do have.
Also, as a thank you to everyone who stayed till the end of this video, I put together a list of 100 royalty-free sound effects that you can start using in your video right away. Check out the link in the description and please take advantage of this free resource. The last use case I mentioned was a descriptive sound. Descriptive sound is a broad term for anything that actually describes what's happening on screen. For example, I added a sound of someone flipping through pages for the B-roll layer of this scrolling motion. Watched over 100 tutorials on how to make cinematic video. It's not an exact one-to-one match because when you scroll through a page, it technically doesn't make a sound. But you can use your creative judgment to find sound that enhance the context of a situation. Another great use of a descriptive sound would be for a storytelling type of video. For example, let's say someone's telling a story of how they got shot. I know, that escalated quickly, but I couldn't think of anything else because I just watched this video by Genus talking about his experience. Anyways, in this video, when Genius was describing his experience, he used the sound effects to describe the scene. Gunshot, footsteps, loud knock on the door. I mean, feel free to go watch his video because I really felt like he did an excellent job telling his story. Albeit a very scary story told in a way that makes you feel like you were in the situation with him, even though there was no visuals to support that. It made his story really come to life and clearly left a lasting impression on me. I try to keep this video as practical and approachable as possible, but if there's still some more questions, please let me know in the comments below. And as always, consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel because they go a long way for small creators like myself. See you in your next video.